Sunday, or maybe Monday, I don't know. But we passed 200 subscribers. So a big thank you for all the support with that. My goal was to have 250 by the end of the year, and I think we're already at like 215, so we should be right on course to hit that number. So thank you to everyone who has subscribed or supported the channel in any way. As I said, we're going to be doing our week 13 recap video, so we will just get right into that. As always, we have our trusty notebook here, and we will open to a fresh page and get things started. There we go. As always, we'll start with the Thursday night game. Which was the Bills versus the Patriots. The Bills won 24-10 in this one. The Bills are now 9-3, and the Patriots are 6-6. Josh Allen led the game with 223 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. James Cook led the game with 64 rushing yards on 14 carries. And Stephon Diggs led the game with 92 receiving yards and a touchdown. Moving on to Sunday's games. We have the Steelers versus Falcons. The Steelers won 19-16. The Steelers are now 5-7, and the Falcons are 5-8. Kenny Pickett led the game with 197 passing yards and 1 touchdown. Najee Harris led the game with 86 rushing yards. And Drake London of the Falcons led the game with 95 receiving yards. Next is Packers versus Bears. The Packers won 28-19. The Packers are now 5-8, and the Bears are 3-10. The Bears were actually winning this game 19-10 in the fourth quarter, but lost the fourth quarter 18-0 behind a couple of Justin Fields interceptions. So they had the lead by 2 scores and blew it in the last quarter. So tough loss for the Bears there. Justin Fields led the game with 254 passing yards and the aforementioned 2 interceptions. He also had 70-something yards on the ground and a touchdown. But A.J. Dillon led the game in rushing yards with 93 and a touchdown. And Equinemius St. Brown of the Bears led the game with 85 receiving yards. In the Jaguars-Lions game, the Lions blew out the Jaguars 40-14. One week the Jaguars are pretty bad, the Lions are pretty bad, and the next week they look like the best team of all time, just like scoring all these points. I mean, granted it was versus the Jaguars, but I don't think they have the worst defense in the league, and they're coming off a win versus the Ravens, so pretty impressive win for the Lions to move to 5-7. And the Jaguars are now 4-8 with the loss. Jared Goff threw for 340 yards and 2 touchdowns. DeAndre Swift had 62 rushing yards and a touchdown. And Amon-Ra St. Brown had 11 catches for 114 yards and 2 touchdowns. Pretty funny that the two brothers, Equinemius and Amon-Ra, led their games in receiving in the same week. That's a pretty cool thing to happen. I'm sure their parents were happy with that. Jets Vikings is next. The Vikings won 27-22. The Jets are now 7-5 and the Vikings are 10-2. Mike White led the game with 369 passing yards and 2 interceptions. Zonovan Knight led the game with 90 rushing yards. And Garrett Wilson led the game with 162 receiving yards for the Jets. Next was Commanders Giants, and this game actually ended in a 20-20 tie. I believe that's the first tie that's occurred since I started doing these recaps, so I'm just gonna highlight in the middle of the two teams because neither team gets the win. Taylor Heineke had 275 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Brian Robinson led the game with 96 rushing yards. And Terry McLaurin led the game with 105 receiving yards and a touchdown. The Commanders are now 7-5-1, and the Giants are 7-4-1. Titans Eagles is next. The Eagles won this game 35-10. Pretty convincing win against one of the better teams in the AFC. The Eagles are now 11-1, and the Titans are 7-5. Jalen Hurts had a big day, 380 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. Ryan Tannehill actually led the game in rushing with just 34 yards. And A.J. Brown had his revenge game with 119 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. For those of you who don't know, A.J. Brown used to play for the Titans, but they traded him to the Eagles. And he had a very good game against against his former team, so that's why it's a revenge game. Broncos Ravens is next. We had a thrilling 10-9 victory for the Ravens, and of course I say thrilling in the most sarcastic way possible. The Broncos continue to not know how to score points as they move to 3-9 on the season. And the Ravens, on the other hand, are now 8-4. Russell Wilson led the game with 189 passing yards. Latavius Murray led the game with 47 rushing yards. And Greg Dulcich led the game with 85 receiving yards. Next is the Browns-Texans. The Browns won 27-14 in Deshaun Watson's return to football. The Browns are now 5-7, and the Texans are 10-1. There wasn't a whole lot of offense in this game. I think the Browns' special team and defense combined for 3 touchdowns. I only know that because I was playing against them in fantasy this week, and they put up 31 points, which, if you don't play fantasy, is a lot of points. And I needed to win my matchup to make the playoffs, and I ended up losing by 1 point. So that was pretty depressing. Kyle Allen led the game with 201 passing yards and a touchdown. Nick Chubb led the game with 80 rushing yards. And Seymour of the Texans, I apologize, I don't know his first name, led the game with 46 receiving yards. Seahawks Rams is next. Seahawks won 27-23. They are now 7-5, and the Rams are 3-9. Geno Smith had 367 passing yards and 3 touchdowns. Cam Akers had 60 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. And Tyler Lockett had 128 receiving yards and a touchdown. Dolphins 49ers is next. The 49ers won 33-17. This is despite Jimmy Garoppolo injuring his foot, I believe, in the second quarter. And he is now out for the rest of the season, so tough news for 49er fans, although rookie Brock Purdy did not do terribly in his taking over of the top quarterback position. Tua Tagovailoa led the game with 295 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Christian McCaffrey led the game with 66 rushing yards. And Tyreek Hill led the game with 146 receiving yards and a touchdown. Both teams are now 8-4. Chiefs Bengals is next. The Bengals continue their dominant run versus the Chiefs and win 27-24. think they've beat them the last 3 or 4 times they've played them, which is pretty unlike the Chiefs. Joe Burrow led the game with 286 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Samaje Perine had 106 rushing yards. And Jamar Chase led the game with 97 receiving yards in his return from injury. Chargers-Raiders is next. The Raiders won 27-20. The Chargers are now 6-6, and the Raiders are 5-7. Justin Herbert had 335 yards and a touchdown. Josh Jacobs had another big day, 144 rushing yards and a touchdown. And Devontae Adams had another big day with 177 receiving yards and 2 touchdowns. The Sunday night game was Colts-Cowboys. A game in which the Cowboys won 54-19. This was another scoregami, the second of the season. A scoregami is a score that between 2 teams that has never happened in NFL history before. So that was pretty cool. The Cowboys were winning this game 21-19 heading into the 4th quarter. And then they scored 33 fourth quarter points unanswered, which is pretty ridiculous. They had a couple defensive touchdowns, some interceptions, that kind of stuff. But yeah, it was a pretty wild 4th quarter to watch. As I mentioned my fantasy matchup before, I had CeeDee Lamb, and I was down 0.8 points, which is 8 yards, in like the middle of the 3rd quarter. So I just needed 8 more yards from CeeDee Lamb, but the Cowboys just kept getting defensive touchdowns and running all over the Colts, so he never got to play in the game again and get those 8 yards, so that kind of sucked too. But Matt Ryan led the game somehow in passing yards with 233 and 2 touchdowns. Tony Pollard had 91 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns. And Alec Pierce led the game with 86 receiving yards and 1 touchdown. The Colts are now 4-8-1, and the Cowboys are 9-3. Saints and Bucks was the Monday night game. The Buccaneers won 17-16. The Buccaneers won on a last-second touchdown pass by Tom Brady. I think they were down, 16? They were down 16-3. Yeah, they were down 16-3 and scored a touchdown with 3 minutes left and then got the ball back, and Brady led them down the field again for another touchdown to win the game in the final seconds. Big win for the Bucs to go to 6-6. And their division rivals Saints are now 4-9. Brady led the game with 281 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Leonard Fournette led the game with 49 rushing yards. And Ron Shaheed of the Saints led the game with 75 receiving yards. The 2 teams on bye this week were the Cardinals and the Panthers. That's going to be it for our recap video. Those are all the games from week 13. I will have the Week 14 predictions video out on Thursday before the Thursday night game, as usual. Once again, thank you for all the support recently. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.